we're really excited to introduce to you Dr. Milene Brownlow. She's a Ph.D. and a health scientist with a focus on nutritional neuroscience. She started as a neuroscientist, focusing on brain areas that control food intake and metabolism, and she became interested in the connection between nutrition and brain health. Dr. Brownlow earned her Ph.D. in medical science with a concentration in neuroscience from the University of South Florida, where she studied the role of diet-induced ketosis and calorie restriction on Alzheimer's pathology. She was awarded a Post Doctoral Fellowship to investigate nutritional approaches to optimizing brain health and cognitive performance at the Air Force Research Laboratory, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Since then, she has continued working to a better understanding on how nutrition and other lifestyle approaches can be applied to different clinical conditions. Dr. Brownlow has authored over 20 peer-reviewed publications and contributed to the formulation and launch of products with neurological health and ketogenic platforms. She's passionate about clinical translation of scientific findings, helping bridge the gap between academia, scientific communication, and product development. In her spare time, she enjoys reading, hiking, and spending time with her husband and daughter.
This is going to be a fascinating discussion about the ketogenic diet. What exactly is the ketogenic diet? What are the benefits? Foundational supplements that are important for brain health, such as coenzyme Q10, magnesium, and omega-3 fatty acids. Also, the role of food and lifestyle medicine in the improvement and in the prevention of cognitive dysfunction. We'll talk a little bit about fasting, time-restricted eating, ketone bodies. We'll talk about her association with Jeff Volek and his studies on body composition, beta-hydroxybutyrate. She also will mention the work of Lisa Mosconi, Ph.D., who wrote a fascinating book called The XX Brain. We'll talk about glucose uptake in the brain, menopause and cognitive decline, amyloid plaques, the glymphatic system, the 6 pillars of brain health, and creatine, how that affects brain health and prevention of cognitive dysfunction. So without further delay, let's get on to this fascinating discussion with Milene. Well, Milene, this is very exciting. We're looking forward to our discussion. Just to get started, we like to know, your journey, what led you to your research. I know you did a postdoc fellowship in nutritional approaches to optimizing cognitive and brain health. And it's interesting to me that there's an Air Force research laboratory that supports this. And you got your PhD from the University of South Florida, and you've worked on ketogenic diets. And I don't know what it is about South Florida, but isn't Dominic D'Agostino there?
Yes, I actually worked with him.
So you guys are really focused on on ketogenic stuff. So anyway, if you can give us your journey, that would be great.
So thank you very much for joining us today. We're really excited to talk about this topic of cognition, preserving brain health, and how to do that in the best way possible. So thank you for being with us again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely meeting you and learning about your journey as well. Yeah, so I'm originally from Brazil. My journey starts back there in undergrad school. I started studying how the brain works to control food intake and metabolism. So I was interested in how specific brain areas were working with different neuropeptides, and this is in all rodent studies, and injecting different neuropeptides in brain areas and seeing the effects that it would take in food intake and peripheral metabolism. And from there, I really became interested in other behaviors that would also affect food intake and metabolism. So I moved on to, for my master's, I was studying sleep deprivation as a stressor. So mostly stress-induced effects on, again, food intake and metabolism, but using sleep deprivation or sleep restriction as a stressor, and still studying those hypothalamic areas or brain areas that were affected by sleep deprivation and how that would affect the neurochemistry in the brain that's associated with metabolism overall. And after that, I moved here to the United States and I did my PhD in South Florida, as you mentioned. So worked with Dominic D'Agostino, and we developed some ketogenic diets for mouse models. So at the time I was working at an Alzheimer's research lab, and metabolism wasn't really an area of interest at the time, but we wrote a grant to the Alzheimer's Association trying to investigate the connection that Alzheimer's has with insulin regulation, because we know that type 2 diabetes is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So controlling insulin and glucose levels using a ketogenic diet, we wanted to know how that would affect pathology in the brain and the behavioral components of Alzheimer's disease. So at the time we were using transgenic mouse models, and we had some great results developing the diet, achieving ketosis, developing some ketone supplements that Don's still using in his lab. We didn't really have great outcomes as far as the neuropathology in the brain. So I think at the time we had some great motor performance improvements using ketogenic diet. So some of these animals, they become frail as they develop the disease. And we saw motor improvement, which is great from a clinical standpoint, right? If it means that your patient is better able to move around or dress themselves or get their own glass of water, clinically speaking, that's palpable. That's an improvement. But when we're talking about the animal models, we didn't really see a whole lot of behavioral improvements in those cognitive tests that are correlated with memory and retrieval. So I think at the time we were a little disappointed, and I actually became a little jaded with the transgenic mouse models. I felt like we were using a very aggressively genetic model to address a metabolic question. And I think there was a mismatch there. And that's what led me to seek opportunities to expand on translational research. So I went on to do my postdoc at the Air Force Research Lab in Ohio at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And at the time, the lab I was working with, they were interested in non-invasive approaches to optimizing cognitive performance. And that includes mitigating stress-induced detriments in cognition. So when we talk about non-invasive, what's more non-invasive than diet, right? Yeah. They had other approaches as well. So exactly, they were studying exercise, and they were at the time studying transcranial magnetic stimulation as well. But my focus was diet, so nutritional interventions and dietary supplements. And the idea is, how can we improve the warfighter performance, mitigate some of the stress detriments? And we did see some positive results as far as we're looking at biochemistry. And by then I moved on to, it was still in rodents, but I moved on to using healthy animals, not animals that had an underlying genetic driver of disease. And we were able to see some good results behaviorally, but also biochemically in the brain. And we were doing, trying to answer some of these questions side by side with groups or labs that were doing similar studies or taking similar approaches in humans, which to me, that was the idea. And after that, I was still very interested in big picture. So pulling back from that, one pathway, one molecule, one mouse model, and trying to understand clinically, how are these questions being asked or being approached by doctors? So what are the big gaps and where are we? Because it takes some time for what we're doing in the lab, for what we're publishing, to actually get to clinical practices.
It takes about 10 years. So that's the average.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I wanted to be able to help understand or help bridge the gap. So having an understanding of the science, what goes on in the lab, what are the recent findings, how can I communicate with doctors? And that's when I moved on to, I worked at Metagenics. I worked as a nutrition scientist, focusing on the cognitive platform. So helping develop products that were science-based, ingredients that had scientific base or scientific justification and clinically effective doses. But part of what I did as well that I really enjoyed was working with doctors. So having this conversation, so what are your pain points? So how are you applying our products, and what are the markers you're looking for different conditions? and using that not only to develop better products and even clinical studies to test efficacy of products, but also develop clinical studies and educational materials. And I love that. To me, that was really fulfilling, because I felt that I was connecting with the audience, with the doctors. You're there, boots on the ground. You're the one seeing the patients. And I think pandemic changed a lot of things. And I think the job became a little less fulfilling when it stopped being so science-based and it was more market trend-based. And to me, it was a personal decision to pull back and reevaluate and pivot a little in my career, working more with scientific management of scientific portfolio, and science communication. So it's a long-winded, but here
that's great, because that really helps a lot of people. Getting that communication to the people. And you mentioned metagenics. I'm a functional cardiologist, and I use a lot of supplements, and we use supplements therapeutically. We use pharmaceutical grade supplements, and Metagenics is one of the companies that we use that we think is very highly of, and there's a handful, maybe 10 good, excellent vitamin companies, and that's one of them. So what are the things that you have worked with, that company, in terms of nutrients, specific nutrients that are helpful from a cognitive standpoint, or a prevention of dementia or prevention of cognitive decline standpoint?
And also, I think we need to remind everybody that food is probably the best way, to get the nutrients, both the macro and micronutrients that we need to function our best. But as we know, most people struggle with get all the nutrients in their food every day. And so supplements help. We created our own supplement that has all the Sicilian secret diet, that the Mediterranean diet supplements. And
the reason is, a lot of people ask us that, why supplements? Why do we create our, we created our supplement because, patients can't adhere to a Mediterranean diet 100% of the time. So, we create a supplement to augment what they do with their nutrition. And this is why we think that supplements are important, because our food source is very depleted. So you cannot always get the supplements you need from the food source. Studies have looked at the concentration of nutrients in foods from the 1950s compared to currently, and there's a big difference. So we'll start with you with the supplements, but then we'd like to see from a nutritional lifestyle standpoint what you also recommend.
Yeah, no, that's such great points. There's been changes in the soil quality, so the nutrients are just not there anymore, to your earlier point. But also, as the name says, there's supplements. They should supplement. So even at Metagenics, they always talked about food first. So starting there and then filling the gaps. And that's why this is such a personalized approach. It needs to be personalized. I struggle with giving, just using a blanket approach, saying these are the supplements you should take, because everybody's different. Everybody's in a different place in their lives, male or female, or developing or not, or physically active or not. So the supplement needs to be targeted. They need to be personalized. And taking this point of view, I personally like the ones that are foundational, because they're working across multiple different pathways, multiple different biochemical areas. And these are what we know omega-3 fatty acids, because they work with every system. They improve every system you think of. We're talking about cardiology, immune, brain health. So they're, big heavy hitters. Magnesium, we know that most people are magnesium deficient. So it's very important for relaxation, muscle health, and so many different other processes. I like CoQ10 a lot. CoQ10 great for mitochondrial efficiency, synaptic health, and helping the cardio, muscle health, brain health as well.
So just for a moment for our audience, when you said help for mitochondrial deficiency, so just to help people to understand, what is that? How do people know, do I have a mitochondrial deficiency?
Yeah. Well, that's a harder question to measure or to track, but mitochondria, they are, using the common phrase, they're the powerhouse of the cells. The mitochondria is what's actually helping us produce energy or ATP within our cells. So thinking about that, you think of every single process in your body, every single cell or physiological system, you depend on that ATP or the energy molecule. So we know now that they're also, mitochondria is also associated with the production of those reactive oxygen species. So talking about oxidative stress. So in dysregulated mitochondria or processes that point to mitochondrial deficiency, you know that you will have increased oxidative stress. So that's why it's important to have something to help quench that oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species. It's a little harder to measure, but we do know that when we track, especially in studies, I don't really know. You might be you are better versed than me in those clinical labs or laboratories that might be directly associating. I know there are a lot of surrogate measures for mitochondrial health, but in the lab, you could see by number of mitochondria or measuring the different steps in the mitochondria in the ATP synthesis process. So it's a little more indirect, but we know that when we're talking about energy producing organs or processes in the body, mitochondria is the one to focus on. And CoQ10 is definitely a supplement that is it's key for that. So that's the one I like because it's also foundational and it's working across multiple different areas.
And it's also important, because CoQ10 tends to go down as we get older. And also certain medicines like the cholesterol medicines and beta blockers sometimes make us lose or make the CoQ10 levels go down. So I agree. I think those three are pretty much part of our foundational, the omega-3 fatty acids, magnesium, and CoQ10 are really foundational. I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that also from, again, thinking that these are supplementing your lifestyle or your nutrition, I think that it really depends on your activity levels, where you are, what you can do, but really focusing on food, like real food, real whole foods, things that you can, things that don't come in a box or in a package, that have minimal ingredients. So I like meals that are easy, 5 ingredients or less that you can, we're all busy. We all have families and life, so we can be doing too many elaborate things every single day. But really, the dark greens, leafy vegetables, or the low, less starchy vegetables, I do like. Again, I grew up in Brazil, so I'm not completely against grains. I grew up on rice and beans. So rice and beans, a big salad, and a source of protein. So protein's still very important. Lean proteins, animal proteins. I'm a big fan of animal proteins because I think that they still do providing those levels of minerals and vitamins that it would be harder to achieve the same levels in the different.
Yeah, we agree. We believe in the Mediterranean style, that which is a big term, but it's an omnivore diet. You eat everything. You eat animal protein, but we also believe in grains. Sandra's from Italy. She grew up in Sicily.
Yeah.
And, they use very high quality grains there.
And like you were mentioning, the whole food is what is important, right? We can't take it away and then fortify it later, right? Because our body does not support it the same way. It doesn't metabolize or recognize it the same way. Right? So we take things away and then we put on the box fortified with. And so it's not the same supplement that we're talking about when you were talking about your supplementation, right? So we need to get the whole food. We need to get the fibers and the minerals and the vitamins that are usually in the outer part of the grain.
Yeah,
most abundant.
Yeah, in the variety, right? So we're talking about colors as well. So even the dark leafy greens, there are different varieties, different types. And the more you introduce the color, I know you've talked about this as well in other instances in your book about the different phytonutrients that you get from fruits and vegetables that have that pigmentation, those colors that are bringing with them antioxidants and other elements that will help with oxidative stress, inflammation, and so many other processes. So I think variety, taking into account that we should try to integrate different things, even if it's slowly. Some people are picky or children are picky, but it's easier to start slowly, try one different food item, one different ingredient, and then you add on to that. Or even just try different, get out of your comfort zone, try different spices. Spices also bring that, not just the flavor, but all those different micronutrients that we don't think about. We just think of spices as something to bring color or add flavor, but there's so much nutrition that comes from them that is also beneficial.
Yeah. Well, I know you've done a lot of your work has been on the ketogenic diet and how that affects brain health. So I would really like to know what your feeling is about, specifically for prevention of cognitive decline, because that's one of our areas of focus, specifically what kind of lifestyle, and ketogenic diets, or maybe even time restricted eating, and how that affects, maybe a short period of ketosis, and how beneficial that is for the brain, what your opinion is about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I've spent so much time studying the ketogenic diet, and I think people just assume that I follow a ketogenic diet, which I don't necessarily. I think that there's a time and place for ketogenic diets. They can be great, but I think that there's been just a boom. When I started studying ketogenic diets back with Dom at USF, it was almost sacrilegious to say, can't eat sugar. And then everybody would say, sugar, your brain needs sugar, which it doesn't necessarily, because it thrives on ketone bodies. But now it's the opposite. Everybody thinks that keto is, it's that panacea. And it's not necessarily the case. There's a time and place. So keto is wonderful as a therapeutic diet. Sorry, I don't think I've had enough coffee yet. Sorry, but coffee also has polyphenols, right? It's also
right.
So,
we have it too.
Yeah. So you're as a therapeutic diet. So started for epilepsy, so especially resistant epilepsy in children. But also there's a lot more science showing that metabolic disorders, type 2 diabetes. Jeff Volek's doing wonderful science in Ohio, and there's a Virta Health studies showing that for type 2 diabetes, remission or decrease in medication levels. And now more and more conditions are being studied, neurological conditions, Parkinson's, MS, ALS. So,
and in schizophrenia, there are some very good studies done on that to have of psychotic symptoms for schizophrenic patients.
Before we go on, can you explain what exactly is a ketogenic diet?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I should have started there, right? Yeah. So ketogenic diet, by definition, is a diet that leads to the production of ketone bodies. So ketone bodies are a byproduct of fat oxidation, so the breakdown of fat in your liver. So that happens when usually you restrict carbohydrates. So because there's an insulin regulation, so if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, you have high levels of glucose in your bloodstream. So that prompts your insulin to go up and deal with all that glucose. So store it away and shuffle the glucose around. So you don't have a lot of opportunity to use fat when glucose is your primary source of energy, your primary fuel. But when you restrict carbohydrates and you either start ingesting more fat, and we're talking about healthy fats, and I think a lot of people go immediately to the burgers without a bun, or to the bacon and butter. We're talking healthy fats too. So there's olive oil and avocado and fish and nuts and all these different wonderful sources. So when you ingest more fats while you're restricting carbohydrates, so that will lead your body to shift biochemically to break fat for energy instead of glucose. So, and that will also help mobilize body sources or deposits of fat. And that's why people use it as a weight loss tool, because when you are what we call keto adapted, your body has the appropriate biochemistry to burn fatty acids as a main fuel. So you will start tapping into those deposits, adipose tissue, and then you start losing weight. And that's why people are going,
ketogenic diet.
Now, is there a differentiation when you're on a ketogenic diet between visceral adipose tissue and subcutaneous fat, or is it you lose both?
No, you use both.
Okay.
And there are great studies, and Jeff Volek is doing amazing work at the Ohio State University, where he actually does DEXA scans, and he's actually measuring all the different sources of adipose tissue, but also muscle mass and inflammatory markers, and he's showing that there is not nearly as much lean mass loss. So that's very important too. So it's not a high protein diet, but you have to have adequate amounts of protein.
You don't lose muscle mass.
You don't lose muscle mass if it's done appropriately. And that's why I'm a little reticent to say anybody can do a ketogenic diet. I think that if used therapeutically, it should be done together with your practitioner, because you will need to adjust medication. It could be insulin levels, or it could be a psychiatric medications. I know that there's now a lot of studies in depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia. But if you're doing it for weight loss, it's still helpful to do it with a nutritionist or with your practitioner, so you can actually measure, calculate those macro and micronutrients. So you're not losing muscle, you're not losing electrolytes, because I know that initially there's that what they call the keto flu, right? You start feeling headaches, you're just not very energetic. And that has a lot to do with electrolyte imbalance, because as you start losing weight, your insulin goes down. And there's also your kidney, the way it's filtrating electrolytes. There's a difference in how you're getting rid of water, but you're still not necessarily doing a great job balancing your electrolytes. That's why there's a need for proper follow-up and a proper matching different macro and micronutrients. There's a calculation there that I don't think anybody can just wing it. You should do it carefully. You should plan ahead, because you need the proper time to give your body proper time to go through this biochemical transition. Otherwise, you're just going to get frustrated. You're just going to end up binging and give up after 2 weeks. And also, you're not going to see the results you're hoping for. So yeah, that's why
But better to do it with a nutritionist guidance, correct?
Preferably, yes.
And one of the questions I've always had with a ketogenic diet, we see benefits, like you mentioned, in these different areas. But a ketogenic diet, by definition, is a low carbohydrate diet, right? So how do you differentiate the benefits from the low carb, just being, getting your insulin levels normalized, getting your hemoglobin A1C reduced, versus the ketones themselves? How do you differentiate, how that balance of benefit affects the patient?
Yeah, I think that they're both happening at the same time. So you do have great benefit from reducing your carbohydrate intake, especially refined sugars, processed simple carbohydrates. And because we know that there's a high level of inflammation that comes from consuming high doses of refined sugar, simple carbohydrates. So you do benefit from that, and you do have that immediate or short-term insulin glucose benefit. But now there's more and more studies showing that ketone bodies themselves, and these are 3. These are acetone, acetoacetate, and beta-hydroxybutyrate, with beta-hydroxybutyrate being the one that's mostly predominantly found in the bloodstream. Acetone you usually exhale, and that's why people do have the difference. They can tell by that acetone breath when they start following ketogenic diet. So now we know that beta-hydroxybutyrate is also much more than just a fuel molecule. So yes, it's broken down in the cell and the mitochondria to produce ATP, but it's also a signaling molecule. There's several studies now showing that beta-hydroxybutyrate is actually acting in your, it's modulating genetic expression and of those genes or those pathways that are associated with inflammation, with oxidation or oxidative processes, in longevity processes as well. So mTOR, IGF-1. So there's a whole it triggers a whole process that it will lead to improve not only health span, but now they're talking about lifespan as well. And that's where it crosses over what you were talking about, the time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting. I know you've interviewed Walter Longo, so I know you've already heard all about different types of time-restricted feeding and fasting mimicking diets or just intermittent fasting. But I think that that's where it has that overlap, because fasting, any type of fasting, if it's done well or if it's done consistently, will lead to a level of ketosis. Could be mild ketosis, but you still have beta-hydroxybutyrate there that it's adding to those, the activation of those longevity pathways.
So instead of going through the torture of a ketogenic diet, can you just take a supplement? Can you take beta-hydroxybutyrate as a supplement instead? Is that work?
Well, there's some studies now trying to show that, trying to investigate that could be the case. And I think it depends on what your goal is. So if it's something that is acute, it might help you with that boost in ketosis or increased level of beta-hydroxybutyrate in your bloodstream that might give you that boost of attention or energy. There's some studies showing that it could help increase athletic performance. But I think ultimately it won't, if you keep doing what you're doing, if you have an unhealthy diet and you're just taking beta-hydroxybutyrate, it will not negate the detrimental effects of an unhealthy diet. I think that it could be an acute, and there's still a lot of studies trying to answer that question, and it could be a dosing issue. It could be a type of exogenous, but we're talking, if you're just taking a supplement, we're calling it exogenous ketones because it's coming from outside instead of the one that's being produced by your liver. Because they're formulating different products. So there's the beta-hydroxybutyrate, now they're ketone esters. So there are studies coming, and I would look to Dom's research because he's phenomenal and he's doing a lot of studies trying to compare ketone esters, the ketone salts, different doses, different applications. My opinion from what I've seen so far is that we're not quite there. Again, acutely might be okay. I think chronically it's not really mitigating the detrimental effects of an unhealthy diet. But I don't know, we'll keep watching the research.
So you feel that your feeling is that a ketogenic diet is good for specific conditions, like you mentioned, and for short periods of time, correct? Not as your foundational diet forever.
Well, it depends on the condition. So if you're talking about epilepsy, for example, those drug-resistant or refractory epilepsy in those children, then yes, it needs to be sustained for a long period of time. Depending on the condition, it could be cyclical. I think that there's some good studies now showing that a cyclical ketogenic diet, where you're actually following the seasonality of different foods or different nutrients that could be helpful to. So you could follow a ketogenic diet and when we're talking about seasonal or cyclical, we're not saying, well, I'll do it over the week and then I'll binge on the weekend and eat whatever I want. No, we're talking about you do it for 4 or 6 months, and maybe during spring and summer when you have abundance of other nutrients, you have berries, you have fresh fruits and vegetables that are easier to find, then you take advantage of that as well. And when we're talking about cycling out or off of a ketogenic diet, we're not talking about, I can eat whatever I want. It's more, can we take advantage of those fruits, things that are a little maybe higher in sugar, but natural sugars, like potatoes and different things that are healthy and also whole foods. So for grains, yes, if you're not,
this may mimic what we've naturally have done over the ages, correct? Where after the summer's over, where we eat all these fruits, and then we go into the winter where we're starving. Basically, this is probably what humans have done over hundreds of thousands of years naturally.
Yeah, and you're tapping into your natural resources or your stored deposits, right? You switch to, during fall, winter, you switch to a more low carbohydrate ketogenic diet, and then you're tapping into your body deposits, which are not there for anyway. So yeah, and I think that again, it depends on what your practitioner, what you're doing a ketogenic for, and what your practitioner is telling you about the different markers and the levels of medication. Because if you're doing it for a therapeutic purpose, you need to be mindful of how that affects your medication levels or interaction with other medications.
Biomarkers, to follow all those biomarkers. Now, initially, you were talking about how, we're different in terms of sex and in terms of ages. And so when we're talking about all of this, about the ketogenic diet, we're talking about healthy adults, right? So kids who have epilepsy, of course, has been shown to be incredibly helpful remission of symptoms sometimes just with the ketogenic diet, but we wouldn't recommend ketogenic diet for children, right? And we wouldn't recommend it for pregnant women. We wouldn't recommend it necessarily for a very old person.
Yeah.
And do you know if there are any differences between women and men that follow ketogenic diets?
Yeah.
And in that vein, also, I know you've done some research on the cerebral energy demands of men, in the sex differences. So we'd like to hear about that also.
Yeah, no, these are great questions. And I'm very just glad that this question is now being asked more and more, because that hasn't been the case. I think that gender differences is a topic that's severely understudied. But I think for a ketogenic diet, we haven't had a great number of studies asking that question or comparing. I know that, I keep going back to Jeff Volek's group, because we've done a recent collaboration, and they actually did, I think we're about to publish out an article that we just did a subgroup analysis of women only, and we did find that while there weren't differences in the outcomes, there weren't any detriments either from like a hormonal or cycle standpoint, but there has been anecdotally conversations about how women have a much harder time either following a ketogenic diet or seeing benefits. So to that point, I think that again, I go back to the point that we need to have a proper follow-up with the doctor, because there might be some hormonal nuances there that need to be taken into account, especially if these are perimenopausal women. There hasn't been specific studies for ketogenic diet per se. I know that there's some that are being planned or designed right now, but we don't quite know what that would look like just yet. For cerebral energy metabolism, so I haven't done the studies myself. I'm very interested in the topic, because I think that not only I'm a woman, but I know that the question is now being asked more and more from the Alzheimer's standpoint. For 1 every 3, the 2 out of 3 Alzheimer's patients are female. So Lisa Mosconi is the researcher that's doing amazing work in this area, and she studies, she's doing PET scans of women's brains and looking for not just changes in cerebral energy metabolism, so uptake of glucose, but also estrogen receptors or estrogen levels in the brain of these women. So we know that we think of estrogen as just a hormonal regulator, but estrogen is also, it acts as a neurotransmitter in the brain. It's a master regulator of energy in the brain. And what she's showing is that there's a steep decline in estrogen in the brain that goes along or follows along with a decline in specific brain functions or specific symptoms. So we're talking about changes in estrogen levels in the hypothalamus, and hypothalamus is an area that is associated with temperature control. So now we're talking about like hot flashes that we see in women that are associated with a menopausal symptom or perimenopausal symptom, also associated with libido and sleep changes. So we talk about menopausal symptoms, but these are actually neurological symptoms, right? When we
symptoms possibly too, correct? Because the estrogen might have also metabolic effect.
Absolutely. And that's what's just showing that the symptoms that we see in women that are preceding these cognitive changes that are associated with perimenopausal or menopausal symptoms, they're actually neurological symptoms. And these are happening in the brain much earlier than what we're calling Alzheimer's symptoms, but they're actually like red flags. So we're seeing that. So women go through these transitions more than men do, because like both go through puberty, right? But women have these additional changes in this time of life, and men may see much, much later, but they're not as impactful to their brains in that, to that extent. So they're starting to ask this question, starting to study, and I'm very glad that that's the case, because we need different approaches. We need to start a conversation about how we can actually spot these differences or these symptoms earlier, because we know now that especially for Alzheimer's disease or for cognitive decline, these changes in the brain are happening decades before symptoms appear. Exactly. And by the time there's a diagnosis, it may be too late to reverse some of these changes. So we need to be able to ask the question and tailor these approaches for females much better than what we're doing now.
So the cerebral energy metabolism between, the difference between men and women, is it all due to hormonal differences, or is there a difference in metabolism, just the metabolism itself in between men and women?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure, to be honest. I know that their insulin or glucose uptake in the brain changes drastically as you age. And when you have a cognitive decline or Alzheimer's, this change in glucose uptake is much steeper or much more dramatic for those patients. And that could also be the case, knowing that some of these conditions are more prevalent in women. It could be that the insulin regulation or that glucose uptake in the brain that's being impacted by the hormones. And it could be the case that it's not exclusive, or that hormonal regulation is also dictating or interacting with the uptake of glucose to the brain. I think that there's still a lot of room for discussion there and more research. I think that it's a complex question. But yeah, I'm glad we're asking that.
Sure. We know, as you know, as a cardiologist, that if a woman has diabetes, has a greater chance to develop a cardiovascular disease than if a man has diabetes. So women tend to be affected more by insulin changes, and also possibly is that the drastic change might have a factor, because we know that immediately with menopause is a year, right? A year. You have your last period, a year later, you're considered to be officially menopause. And in that year, you see that arteries stiffen in women 100-fold. Right? So these changes appear really, really drastically. You stop sleeping, you start to have brain fog. And so I don't know if partly is this abrupt entering into this speeding of aging, that you had protection from estrogen till menopause, and then you don't have that protection all of a sudden anymore. So there is this possibly aging, acceleration of aging.
And interconnection or relationship between those two components, absolutely. We tend to think of the different systems separately, right? The hormones, the endocrine system, and cardio system. But they're actually connected. Your entire body, we learn physiology as different systems, respiratory, neurological, but everything is connected. We can't really separate one from the other. So yeah, it's
one thing that you mentioned before is that the earlier we intervene, the better we can protect the brain. And this is true for men and women.
Yes.
And this is seen in, in the world of bioidentical hormones. The earlier you start with bioidentical hormones, it appears that women benefit better than if you wait too long because of the effect. But it's, and women have this problem, as men go into, the testosterone levels slowly go down over years. They have this abrupt, drop in estrogen. And I think that's probably part of the problem, is that this crazy change in the hormone levels probably makes a huge difference on everything, because you have estrogen receptor. Women have estrogen, men too, but women have estrogen receptors all over, including their brain.
Absolutely, yeah. It is drastic, and yeah, to your point, the earlier the better, and not just for the bioidentical hormones, but prevention is still the key. I think for Alzheimer's and many of these chronic diseases, I think that the earlier we start thinking about it, one thing that I always try to emphasize is that your metabolic health now, in middle age, will dictate your cognitive health later. So they're two sides of the same coin. We tend to think of metabolic health when we're younger just because we want to feel good, we want to look good, but then we worry about cognition later. And that's not the case. So how well your metabolism is now will actually dictate your cognitive health. And that's why I'm really passionate about science communication, about healthy cognitive aging, because I think that people tend to just wait and not worry about it now. But there's just so many things that we can do now to ensure healthy cognitive function later that, you can promote those. Our brain is incredibly redundant, right? You have all of those synapses, all those overlaps and processes. And as you start aging and as Alzheimer's or the neuropathology starts happening, you start losing some of these connections, you start having some brain neuronal death, but you're able to compensate because of all those redundancies. It isn't until much later when you start having symptoms that you realize that the neuropathology in the brain is already reversible. You've already lost so many cells and so many connections that you can't go back. And that's why I'm really passionate about, let's work on it now. Let's work on increasing that diversity and that connectivity in your brain to do everything you possibly can to postpone that or even avoid that decline.
This is, my focus is prevention, and so is Sandra's, and cardiology, it's the same thing. You want to start focusing on prevention very early in your life because the problems happen over decades. We talk about nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, how you deal with stress. So what, in your opinion, and I know these probably cue in on a lot of these things, what are the 4 or 5 things that people should do to really protect their cognitive function as they age well?
It's funny, and I always give this example because it's the first thing that comes to my mind. When I was younger, I was attending some of those neuroscience conferences, the Society for Neuroscience, and I remember they had, I don't know if they still have that, they had merchandise, and I used to buy for my daughter. Every single year, they had a onesie that said, "Eat, sleep, and play," and they show their little brain sprouting connections. So that's what I think of. So eat, sleep, and play. For eating, we talked about foods, whole foods, and different micro, macronutrients. I would add water. I could add a 4th there because we talk about our brains, mostly made of fat, but before fat, it's actually mostly made of water, our entire body. So we need water to hydrate, to make sure all those biochemical processes are taking place. So sleep, you mentioned that too. So sleep is where the detoxifying process in your brain takes place. So now we know a lot more about the glymphatic system and how when you sleep, that's when you're actually carrying out all those toxins or debris from biochemical reactions that happen in your brain. Also, we know in the context of Alzheimer's, there are great studies now showing that sleep restriction, if you're sleeping less than 7 hours a night consistently, you have a greater deposit of amyloid plaques in your brain. So that lymphatic system is helping infiltrate or remove some of those plaques or some of those proteins. And by play, what I interpret it as anything that brings you joy. So it could be social connection, definitely exercise, hobbies, anything that reading, anything that takes your mind away. Some people find it in religion, other people find it in community, doing work or volunteering. So that play is so key. We think of careers, we think of families or our day-to-day, but we also need to preserve time to take care of our own fun, our own, be it spiritual or community life. We need to give ourselves that a time and that space to do that. And I think that's what I go with. It's eat, sleep, play, and I would add, move and water there. These are my go-to, and I think they tackle stress management too.
Agree 100%.
Those you're talking about 3 and you're expanding and everything. So probably we can talk about, I know that recently there's been a lot of talk about the 6 pillars of brain health that are, that cognitive elasticity, like to practice, exercise your brain, right? The exercise cognition, doing the things that you want. Sleep, of course, number 1, always for that detoxification that you talked about, mostly because that detoxification happens in the last 2 hours of sleep. So if we miss those 2 hours of sleep, we get less of that detoxifications. And then, of course, exercise. The Mediterranean diet is considered the best diet so far for cognitive health to prevent cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia, and the community life and distressors that you were talking about. So I'm curious to know, what do you do? Do you get to play? Do you get to have fun? Do you get to eat well? What do you do?
Yeah.
Okay.
I try my best. No, we're not perfect, but I do try my best. So food, it's one of those things that I try to make better choices all the time. So I try to focus on whole food ingredients. Again, I mentioned I was born and raised in Brazil, so I did grow up with whole foods, with home cooked meals, and sleep is a big thing for me. I don't always sleep great. I think that after a certain age, my sleep started being a little off. So I do have a sleep routine. I do have a wellness journal. I'm always writing down the things that I've done and try to track, maybe the scientist in me, but I feel like you can't improve what you don't measure, right? So I like writing things down. And I love reading. Reading is my play. I think I just enjoy listening to books and reading, going for walks, exercise. I love having an exercise buddy, like an accountability partner. And I do have that where we do Zoom workouts and we do videos, but I also love here where I live, we have beautiful trails, paved areas that are nature, within nature. And I love that. I love being outside. I love as much as possible spending time outside, spending time with my daughter, spending time with family. As then my husband and I enjoy doing things locally as a family. Supplements, again, I focus on the foundationals, and I do like rotating or cycling supplements depending on where you are in your life, things that I'm doing or different needs that I might have at the moment. I think that foundational are great for every day, that you know that you're going to, tackle those big processes or big areas. But I do like cycling, trying different things. I started recently, I brought back the creatine. I think after having COVID, I had COVID recently. For the first time, I managed to not have it for 3 years. And then one work trip was all it took. And I went back to, I think fatigue was the only thing that stayed with me after being sick. And then I brought back creatine and I saw a difference right away. So it was very helpful. I think
that sounds fantastic. And I hope that other people that heard you feel inspired and can do the same. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Milene. This is great. I think this is super helpful information for our listeners and our patients. And thank you for the time.